account, second-hand account, third-hand. You know what I'm talking about? I'm going to give you an example of that. Are you ready for this? Okay. Okay, here's I'm gonna tell you something in your ear. Okay? Your job is to pass it. You play telephone?
Yeah.
Your job is to pass it to the back, and then Tabby's gonna tell us what you heard, okay?
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh gosh.
Perfect. So they're gonna pass that, okay? You just sit tight for a second, alright?
Don't be the person that messes it up.
Don't be the person that messes it up. Okay, so they're going to pass that. Line of sight is when you're trying to see something, do you have to... So, Ian, you know how to shoot things. If you're trying to see something that's too far away for you to see, always with the answers, Ian. What could help?
Glasses.
Binoculars, glasses.
A telescope.
Okay, telescope. Okay, I asked him that. Are you still passing this, Chloe?
It's right here. Okay.
Oh my gosh, Bella.
Something like this.
Okay. Do you not? All right. How about this? Bella? Straight back. You don't even have to give it to everybody. Just tell him, and then he'll tell her, and we'll go. Oh, great, good. Tell him, and then you can sit down. Her cheeks don't match her sweat. It's adorable. Okay. Okay, and then you just straight back. Just give it straight back, because you guys, my goodness. You guys take forever. Okay, you can sit down. Good job, sir. Just go sit in your seat. You got that?
Yeah.
Okay, just go sit in your seat.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't think you said Jesus something.
Great, super. Okay, so so here's the deal. Now, two people in the back rows of their sections have the information. Okay? One has it 12th hand, one has it first hand. Tammy, what were you told?
John 38.
What?
John 38.
Okay, Sasha, what were you told?
John 3:30?
Yes. They were right, they win.
What was it?
John 3:30.
Good job, Bella.
They win. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Guys, simmer down. Guys, it's not a fair game, right? Because I literally firsthand gave her the answer, and I made you guys pass it all the way back, right? Point being, firsthand is better. Can we agree on that? That was a long walk to get to a short example, but it works. Here's the deal. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about three guys, three mainly, one-ish, who had a first-hand experience with Jesus. Okay? They heard from Jesus firsthand. And we're going to see three things, one each week, that they learned from that. Three things that they experienced from that. Three things that they took away from that experience. Okay? Because this isn't second-hand, third-hand anymore. This is face-to-face. And even today, in the Bible, you have in the Bible first-hand account, so that makes us hearing it, what? Second-hand account. Over 2,000 years, we have a second-hand account. We have actually from the people who were there. Make sense? With me? They heard it from Jesus, they're passing it on to us. So 3 people who interacted with Jesus. Tonight's 3%. Okay, tonight's 3%, big idea, thought for tonight is this. Coming in contact with Jesus is experiencing truth. Coming in contact with Jesus is experiencing, it's not kind of like experiencing truth. Jesus didn't say, I came to kind of talk to you about truth. I came to communicate some truth to you. He said, I am the truth. He literally said, I am the truth. So when we come in contact with Jesus, we experienced the truth. We have actual experience with the truth. Over these 3 weeks, these 3 different people, Jesus had different impacts on. Today we're focused on Pilate and a little bit about Herod, but mostly Pilate, and how Pilate's interaction with Jesus, he couldn't deny the truth. No matter how many shouting voices in him said, it's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie, he face to face with Jesus could not deny the truth. And he failed anyway. But he couldn't deny what the truth was. He couldn't come out and say Jesus was guilty. I like this example, and if you want, you can turn to Luke 23. That's where we're going to be. We're looking towards Easter, in case you hadn't picked up on it. We're looking towards Easter. We got 3 Wednesdays before Easter. Luke chapter 23. And I like this example because there's a lot of people out there who are not quote-unquote Christians who would say Jesus was a good man. Jesus was a prophet. Jesus existed, he had some good thoughts, he was a wise person, and that's literally not possible. Okay, there's 3 options, and somebody came up with this where they all start with L, and that's the easiest way to remember it. Jesus said, I am the Son of God, I am the Messiah. Right? Jesus said that. So that makes him either a liar. Some of you guys have heard this. I'm a liar. He's a lunatic where he believes that. So if he knows he's not the Messiah and claimed to be, he's a liar. If he thinks he is and he actually wasn't, he's nuts. He's a lunatic. Third option being he really is. They say he is the Lord. So liar, lunatic, Lord, they all start with L. Makes it easy to remember. He's either blatantly, bold-faced lying to everyone, he believes it and he's wrong, which makes him crazy, or it's legitimate. He couldn't just be kind of a good guy. Those are the only options. So we're going to look at Luke 23. And if you were here Sunday and heard what I talked about in 1 Corinthians, this passage is kind of broken up similarly in that we have 3 verses that kind of repeat themselves, and then filler in between. So those are like choruses. We sing a song, and it goes verse 1, and then we have a chorus. And then verse 2, and then we repeat the chorus, right? So we've got our chorus here, Luke 23, verses 4, 15, and 22. You don't need to remember that. Those are the choruses in our chapter. But let's start at the beginning. Luke 23, starting in verse 1. It says, Then the whole company of them arose. This is the high priest and his minions. They're known as the Sanhedrin, that had arrested Jesus in the garden. Okay, so they arrested Jesus, came and took Jesus away. The whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Pontius Pilate was the 5th governor of the Roman province of Judea. This is a real historical person that existed. He served under Emperor Tiberius from 26-ish to 36, 37-ish AD. Make sense? Only Pilate had the power to execute people. Okay, so they brought him to him because he was the only one who had the authority for capital punishment. So they brought him to Pilate. And Pilate comes face to face with the truth. And he can't escape it. Now they bring formal charges. Verse 2 says, We found him misleading our nation, forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying he's Christ the King. So there's an offense against the Jews, an offense against the Romans, and an offense against Caesar himself. Just so you understand, governors ruled regions under Caesar. Okay? And it was their job to keep the Jews from uprising, from revolting. They had to kind of maintain the peace in their region. Okay? Because the Romans came in and they took an area of space. They left somebody in charge to make sure that group didn't then retake them as soon as the army left. Make sense? So he was the governor of that area, working under Emperor Tiberius. Verse 3. And Pilate asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, You have said so. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. Pilate ignores the first 2 accusations. The accusation against the Jews and against the Romans. He asked him directly about the 3rd accusation. And Luke here accounts them in this order and the challenge in this order. The question, the title, King of the Jews, Christ Messiah. And here's what's interesting. Jesus, in the Greek, in the original Greek, Jesus' answer is identical in all four Gospels. So a lot of times the Gospels, because they had different perspectives, they record things slightly differently in some places. And it's just a wording, it's the order of the words. So as it's translated, we understand the order of the words as Matthew says it kind of this way, and Luke phrases it this way. It's the same message, they're just recording it differently. If I ask this group over here to all write what I say tonight word for word, you'd all come out with different wordings, but hopefully, if you're listening, similar ideas, right? So, in this case, though, all four Gospels are identical. It's this Greek phrase, sou ageis, which is translated, it is as you say. On point, in other words. He asks him a question, are you the King of the Jews? And he answers him, it's translated in the ESV, you have said so, or it is as you say. Verse 4. Pilate says to the chief priests, I find no guilt in this man. Now there's probably more interrogations behind closed doors that we don't know about. There's probably more discussions that happen. Point being, Pilate comes out. Now the accusers, notice this change in tense. Here's a little English nerdy thing. Notice the change in tense. Okay, at the beginning it says, they accused him, we found this and this and this, right? Pilate comes back, he's the judge, comes back and says, I find no guilt, I find no fault, I don't find any reason to convict this guy. Okay, verse 5. But the crowd, but they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and Galilee, even to this place. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean, and when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. This is Herod Antipas, if you care. He was born 20 BC. He died sometime after 39 AD. He was a ruler of Galilee and Perea. He was called a tetrarch, is the word. Ruler of the quarter is how that's translated. And essentially, because they refer to him sometimes as King Herod, even though he wasn't officially the king, but he carried basically, he was the Jewish ruler. So him and Pilate operated in the same region, but Pilate was working for Caesar, and Herod was a Jewish ruler. Okay, so we have multiple characters going on here. And, excuse me, the account here, the charge is actually not off point in that Jesus did start in Galilee. So we see Luke chapters 1 through 4 focuses on his birth, his early years. Chapters 4 through 9, he's in Galilee. And then he goes on his way to 9 through 19, he's on his way to Jerusalem. 19 through 24, he's in Jerusalem. And only Luke even bothers to mention Herod. The others talk about Pilate, but they don't really talk about Herod. And there's a few reasons Pilate might have sent Jesus to Herod. And they're probably all to some extent true, just in different ways. Pilate might have wanted to present a united front. Might have wanted to say, hey, Herod and I are in this together. Whether we convict or acquit him, we're together on that. So that the Jews, again, don't get upset and the Romans feel like their interests are served. It's also possible Pilate wanted to save Jesus from execution. Remember, Pilate was the only one who could send someone to the cross. So maybe, hey, go to Herod. If Herod finds him guilty, he'll go to prison or he'll get punished in some other way. Okay? That's also possible. And there's probably some piece of both in there. So Pilate sends Jesus, finds no fault with him, sends him to Herod. Verse 8. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he, Jesus, made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then they arrayed him in splendid clothing, sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate, verse 12, and Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this they had been in enmity with each other. He was amused. This literal translation, Herod was amused by Jesus. He had heard, did we lose the mic? No? We did for a second. he had heard, Caleb, stop messing with stuff. Herod had heard about this Jesus, and so he was excited. Hey, get to see him. Maybe he'll do some magic for us. Excuse me. But the problem was, Herod's authority was challenged by this title king of the Jews, even in some ways more...
I didn't do it.
All right.
I did not do it.
You broke another mic. Even in some ways...
I found it.
It's okay. It's fine. We're good?
It's fine.
Just don't...
Mike's working again. It's fine.
Great. I'm not worried about it. Where was it? Herod's authority was challenged somewhat even more than Pilate's by this title, King of the Jews. And Jesus gives no answer to Herod here. Herod is questioning him on one side. You can hear the Sanhedrin, the rulers, the Jewish rulers yelling, and the mob mentality yelling in the other ear, and Jesus gives no answer. It's interesting that friendship comes out of this because you have two rulers here who both met Jesus. And neither one we find out, we don't literally hear Herod say, I find him not guilty or whatever. But the fact that Herod sends him back to Pilate tells us, because of the way that would be handled, tells us he also found no guilt in him. So Herod sends him back to Pilate. And we actually see Herod and Pilate working together in Acts chapter 4. We don't have time for that, but if you're interested, in Acts chapter 4, we see Herod and Pilate have this relationship, this working relationship now. Verse 13. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and said to them, You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges. Neither against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him. Verse 14, we see our second chorus. We see our second repeat of Pilate's main point. I find no guilt in this man. It says, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Coming in contact with Jesus is experiencing the truth. It doesn't matter how loud the crowd is in his face. Pilate meets Jesus and goes, oh yeah, he's not guilty. It was apparent to Pilate in that moment, yeah, he's not guilty. Now it's important to understand why this charge of misleading was such a big deal. Because it was Pilate's responsibility to prevent mobs, to prevent uprisings. So this word misleading is like rebel rousing, is stirring up trouble. They're accusing Jesus of stirring up. They're coming to Pilate. Pilate, your job is to keep the peace. He's over here stirring up trouble. And again, Pilate finds no guilt in him. There was this tenuous peace between the Jews and Romans. They were not actively at war, but the Romans were always worried. So this accusation is a big deal. But again, Pilate has met him face to face, and he can't deny. It would be easier for Pilate to say, to give the people what they wanted in that moment. Now, he does eventually, which is another thing. But in that moment, it'd be easy for Pilate to come out and go, you're right, he's guilty, do it, let's crucify him. But he comes out in the face of the mob and says, no. And it matters here that Herod doesn't find him guilty either, because, get this, because Herod was the Jewish ruler, right? Herod would have known the laws and the traditions and stuff even better than Pilate would have as it pertains to the Jews. So what's interesting here is, if this, and it really is, if this is a religious accusation more than it is a legal obligation, it's not, to the Jews, it wasn't that Jesus was breaking laws, it was that he was claiming to be the Son of God, which was blasphemy. This is a religious criminal even more than it is a legal or a governmental criminal. Make sense? You see how those are different? So when he sends him to Herod, Herod would understand that, would know the intricacies of that, even more than Pilate would. So it's a big deal that Herod, after interrogating him and then mocking him, also has to admit, go back to Pilate. Verse 17. That's what's interesting. Do you notice something in your Bibles?
There's no 17.
There's no 17. Here's what's interesting. Verse 17. Look. It's not a typo. Does anybody's Bible have a verse 17? I'm just curious if anybody has another translation. has an N. But does anybody actually have a 17 with a verse on it?
Mine has a footnote.
Okay. Mine has a footnote as well. Does yours have what 17 says in the footnote? Read verse 17 to us.
Now it was necessary for him to release one prisoner to them during the Passover celebration.
Okay. It was necessary for him to release a prisoner. Now, there's a reason. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here for a second, so just pause. We'll come back to this. I'm going to go over here. Okay? Pause. Verse 17 is not actually part of the original text. It's not written by Luke. Okay? Later on in the process, some dudes were working on the final manuscript, proofreading, checking for all that stuff. And they found this Mark in Mark's gospel. They meant it's actually a verse in Mark's text. Mark had mentioned there's this tradition where he releases a criminal. So whether it comes from Mark's text or it was just a thought of whoever was doing the editing to insert this and say, hey, by the way, this was a tradition to release somebody on this day. Verse 17 is not a part of Luke's original writing. So it's excluded here from the ESV. Some translations include it. So if you go to certain other Bibles, they might have it there. That's okay. That's a decision the editor made to say, hey, I think this is worth being in here even though it's not original. That's okay, but it's not original. Does that make sense? Ish? Okay, good. I like blank stares. We're on track. So verse 16, I will therefore punish and release him. Verse 18, but they all cried out, away with this man, release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Give us that guy. Give us the guy who actually was raising up a rebellion. Give us the guy who actually was out there murdering people. We want him instead of Jesus. Mark 15 actually words it that the chief priests and his people were stirring up the crowd. What they're accusing Jesus of, they're over here in front of Pilate stirring up the crowd. Luke assumed that his readers would know the tradition, which is why he didn't feel the need to say out loud in his text that this was the tradition. He assumed that his readers, that his audience would know that. Verse 20. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, crucify, crucify him. Consider this like a silent chorus. It's like sometimes when we're doing a song and we come to a place that normally would be a chorus, but instead we just play over it, play instrumental over it. This is like a silent chorus, where Pilate even is about to say, hey, I don't think he's guilty, but instead people are just shouting over him. Crucify, crucify him. Verse 22. A third time he said to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him. Third chorus. This one comes with a question. It would be like a song. Third chorus comes with a key change. Why? Why? I have not found him guilty. Face-to-face conversation. Meeting Jesus face-to-face. He's confronted with the truth. Why? I haven't found him guilty. Pilate was an experienced Roman governor. He probably would have overseen dozens, if not hundreds, of cases in his career to have gotten to this point. He looked Jesus in the eye and he asked him the question, are you what you claim to be? And Jesus said, it is as you say. And confronted with Jesus, he experienced the truth. And even in this moment in the face of the mob, Pilate is not willing to admit Jesus' guilt. Pilate is not willing to overrule what he knows. He's going to insist, I found no guilt. I will therefore punish and release him. Verse 23, but they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. Turn with me over to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, we learn two more things that Pilate does or says or hears in this process. Matthew 27, verse 19. verse 18. For he, Pilate, knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Just close proximity to Jesus. One person removed where his wife is impacted. His wife is affected to the point that she has dreams knowing that Jesus is a righteous man. And so she pleads with him, have nothing to do with him. Verse 24, Matthew 27:24. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. Even knowing, so now, listen, Pilate had a job to do. His job was to keep the peace. Okay, and he risked getting in a lot of trouble if there was a riot, if there was a mob, whatever. Pilate is confronted with Jesus. He can't, even in the moment where he's going to give the crowd what they want, because as Matthew said, a riot is starting. He's going to give the people what he wants, what they want. He is still not willing to admit Jesus is guilty. He is still not willing to say, fine, guilty. He washes his hands, and he says, you do what you will. I'm not, this isn't me. I want no part of this. And I find that amazing in the face of someone, we don't celebrate Pilate really, because Pilate ultimately did give in and have Jesus executed. We don't, and nor should we celebrate Pilate. But I kind of have like grudging respect for Pilate, that even in this moment in the face of the mob, he's not willing to come out and falsely convict Jesus. He can't deny the truth standing in front of him. Coming in contact with Jesus is experiencing truth. Now what you're saying, or some of you are saying, well, Nathan, we don't come in contact with Jesus. What does this have to do with us? And I would put it to you that you could come in contact with Jesus in your day-to-day life. I don't mean maybe physically. I don't mean like you're going to be walking down the street and there's a dude in a robe with long hair and you're like, oh, hey. That's not what I mean. I mean, if you're praying, here's the thing. This is why we have the praise wall over here. That's why we have a praise wall, because God answers prayer. And for God to answer prayer, he has to hear prayer. So when you're praying, those aren't just words that go out into the ether. Those are words that are heard and answered. You have a relationship with Jesus Christ. When he answers your prayer, you just had contact with Jesus Christ. When he takes care of you, when he handles something for you, you've had contact. You have come in contact with Jesus. When you read his word, the Bible says that this word is living. This word is active. The word of God is not dead, is not over. It's living and active in our lives. When we spend time in God's word, we come in contact with Jesus Christ, the living Jesus Christ. And coming in contact with Jesus is experiencing truth. And Pilate couldn't deny it. Even as he gives Jesus up to be crucified, he can't deny the truth that he's come in contact with. I find that amazing. So here's the deal. When we go to small groups, it's a small group challenge thing. Okay? So instead of a list of questions for you guys to sit around and talk about, each small group is going to have a job. You're all going to have the same job. You're going to come back and tell us what happens, okay? Your job tonight in small groups is to use the Bible to define truth. Okay? Because it doesn't mean anything to say come in contact with Jesus is experiencing truth if we all have different thoughts of what truth is. So your job is to go into the Bible, and you can't just say Jesus, okay? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and at least one snarky group, probably Mackenzie's group, would come back and be like, Jesus, what do we do with the other 20 minutes? Talk and hang out and laugh and distract my group. Right. And still run over, yeah. So, your job, each group will come back with one sentence. Truth is this. And one verse to back it up. Okay? You'll come up with a lot of verses. You can use your phones for this. Truth is sentence, and then one verse to back it up. Every group And then part two, there's two parts to this. That's part one. Part two, answer the question, why does absolute truth matter? We live in a world where the world is going to tell you, truth is whatever you think it is, man. Truth is whatever you think it is, girl. You got this. I can't just say man anymore. It's the world we live in. I have to be like man and woman. Anyways. Why does it matter that we have truth defined? That truth is an absolute. That it's not whatever the heck we want it to be. Okay, so that's your job. Small group challenge. Small group leaders. 8 o'clock on the dot. It has to be on the dot so we have time to hear what you guys came up with. Please, 8 o'clock. Mackenzie's group, 7:50. Back in here, 7:50. It's going to be great.